This girl needs to be isolated. She's slandering her own father. I heard my mother say that in front of the doctor. I was 15. 3 days later, I was locked inside a psychiatric treatment center with a diagnosis, conduct disorder, and financial delusion. They wrote that I had imagined my father embezzling money from our family's charity fund. The truth? I saw $48,200 disappear from the fund ledger. If one day your child says, "I think something isn't right," would you listen? Or would you find a way to silence them? People say family protects each other, but what happens when a family uses medical records to protect its reputation from its own child? Before I continue, let me ask you something small. Where are you listening to me from? In your familiar kitchen, a quiet living room, or alone after a long day? Leave a comment and let me know. Press like if you believe the truth shouldn't be labeled delusion. And stay until the end of the video, because 15 years later, that very needs to be isolated record came back, but not on their side. The treatment center was in the suburbs of Duluth, nearly 2 hours from Lakewood by car. The room doors locked from the outside. When I said I wasn't making it up, they wrote in the chart, "Denial of condition." When I stayed silent, they wrote, "Withdrawn." Every movement became evidence against me. At night, I heard the nurse's shoes echo down the hallway, neon light reflecting on the small window in the door. I counted each step like I was counting the minutes of a trial where I had no lawyer. Back in Lakewood, my father, Robert Mitchell, still appeared on the local news, speaking about the transparency of the Lakewood Hope Foundation. My mother knelt in church, praying for her unruly daughter, while I was locked behind 2 doors. The whole town saw me as a girl who needed treatment. My honor was wrapped in a label. I couldn't peel it off. In the pocket of the jeans sent with me was a quick photo taken on my old phone, a fund statement with one red number slightly out of line. $48,200 transferred to Community Communications. That line wasn't straight like the others. I looked at it every night. 15 years passed in the blink of an eye. I'm no longer in a room with a locked door. 15 years later, I used that delusional label to apply to law school. I didn't come back for a reunion. I came back to clean the books of this family. They invited me to fundraising events where I stood in the corner with a measured smile. Last week, an anonymous email arrived at my office. The subject line was short: Lakewood Hope under review. Attached was a copy of a communications contract bearing my father's signature. I opened my phone and found the old photo. The number was still crooked. I wasn't anymore. My phone buzzed. My mother, her voice as calm as ever. "Ava, we need you to sign a confirmation, just a formality." I looked at my father's signature in the attachment. I knew what they wanted me to sign. I stood in the kitchen for 15 minutes, just to make a decision that could erase my father's reputation forever. Can you guess whether I signed or did something else? Leave your guess. The truth is in the next part. My mother hung up, leaving a long silence in the small kitchen in Minneapolis. I set the phone down and opened the attachment again. My father's signature slanted slightly to the right, exactly like the thank you letters sent to donors years ago. I zoomed in on the expense category. Community Communications. The amount sat neatly between 2 straight lines, only it was out of rhythm. The door to my father's office was slightly ajar. The desk lamp cast a yellow glow across the glass surface. I stood in the hallway, hand touching the door frame, looking at the fund statement open on the screen. $48,200 transferred on the same day, an internal code unlike the others. I didn't understand every part of how the foundation operated, but I knew how to read what didn't line up. 3 days later was the evaluation, a white room, faint disinfectant smell. Dr. Leonard Price sat across from me, pen poised over a thick file. My parents told their story in calm voices. They said I was obsessed with money, making baseless accusations, acting defiant. When it was my turn, I said one sentence: "I just saw that the money didn't match." The old doctor nodded and wrote, One line in exchange for 15 years of my freedom. Financial delusion, neat handwriting, clean, emotionless. Now, I don't stand in front of a locked door. I open my laptop and send a formal request to the Minnesota State Medical Board asking for the full evaluation record from that year, including standardized questionnaires and documentation explaining patient rights. I attach the old case number. No extra comment. The next afternoon, I meet Hannah Doyle at her office in St. Paul. Her desk is tidy, the window overlooking the Mississippi River with a thin layer of ice. Hannah reads each page of the copied file that just arrived. She pauses at the conclusion, tapping lightly on the edge of the paper. They relied almost entirely on the parent's statement, she says, her voice low but sharp. No full standardized testing, no confirmation that your right to refuse was explained. I look at the missing signature line at the bottom of the page. Next to rights explained, the patient acknowledgement section is blank. Hannah closes the file. Ava, she says slowly, this record, has procedural gaps. This record has procedural gaps. Hannah's words linger in my head as my car turns onto the familiar road leading to the house by Lakewood. Snow lingers in thin streaks on the lawn. The porch light is on even though it's not fully dark. My mother opens the door as soon as I step onto the porch, lightly touching my shoulder as if it's been years since we've spoken seriously. Come in, Ava. We just need to talk a little. The dining table is covered with a white cloth like every Thanksgiving. My father sits at the head, phone face down beside him, silver watch gleaming under the light. On the table is a neatly stapled stack of printed papers with a blue pen clipped on top. It's just a formality, he says calmly, like he's reviewing a budget. You sign confirming that your previous thoughts were mistaken, to avoid unnecessary misunderstanding. I turn the first page. Paragraphs list distorted perceptions, feelings of financial surveillance, unsupported interpretations. They want my signature at the bottom, confirming that my suspicions at 15 were the product of an unstable mind. My mother slides the pen toward me. We have to protect the family, Ava, you understand? My father glances at his watch, then at me. The inspector's just asking a few questions. With this document, everything will go smoothly. I place my hand on the edge of the table to keep the paper from sliding. If I was crazy, why didn't you sue? Or are you afraid that in court the truth wouldn't be as crazy as you want? The air tightens. My mother blinks. My father picks up his phone, then sets it back down. The heater hums softly in the kitchen. We don't want to make this bigger, my mother replies, her voice thinning. You were diagnosed. The record is still there. I look at the stack of papers. Diagnosis, record. Those words once locked me behind a door with a small window. Now they lie neatly on a familiar oak table. I open my bag and pull out a cream-colored envelope. The upper corner bears the seal of the Minnesota State Medical Board. I place it beside their prepared document. What's that? My father asks. The original documents, I reply. I slam the medical board file down in the middle of the dining table. The dry crack echoes louder than the heater. Put away your pile of scrap paper. We're going to read this. Word for word. My mother grips the edge of the tablecloth. My father looks at me. For the first time, not with the eyes of someone controlling a meeting. I pull out a chair and sit down, hand resting on the edge of the envelope. I'm going to read this entire file, at this table. I tear open the envelope. Without waiting for them to react, I read straight from the clinical conclusion. The clinical evaluation section is less than a page long. No standardized questionnaire, no behavioral scale, no documentation explaining a minor patient's rights. At the bottom, the acknowledgement of the right to refuse is blank. My mother stares at the page. My father leans forward. I flip to the appendix. No standardized testing was performed, I read. No patient signature confirming that rights were explained. A silver spoon clinks sharply against a porcelain plate. My mother doesn't dare lift her head. Outside the window, the frozen lake reflects the yellow light. I continue. Dr. Leonard Price is currently under review for potential conflict of interest with parents who made substantial contributions to community projects. My father lifts his head. That's unrelated. I place the paper down in the center of the table. They wrote about me, but they never asked me. It was a difficult time, my mother says, faster than usual. The foundation was under pressure. The press had started asking questions. We just adjusted a little. Financial flexibility doesn't mean wrongdoing, my father cuts in. You understand how organizations operate. Sometimes adjustments are necessary. I flip to the contract attached in the inspector's email and place it next to the old file. The contract date comes after the transfer date. My father's signature sits neatly beneath the cost clause. Flexible, I repeat, then close the file. A family afraid of losing reputation, a girl afraid of losing her voice. Who pays for fear? I push my chair back, the legs scraping lightly against the wood floor. I'm submitting this entire file to the Medical Ethics Board and sending a copy to the inspector. My mother stands abruptly. Ava, don't overreact. My father doesn't speak right away. He looks at the stack of papers in front of him, then at me. For the first time that evening, his eyes aren't those of someone running a meeting. They hold something else, not anger, not contempt. Worry. My father keeps looking at me as I stand. My mother says a few more words about family, but I've already put the file back into my bag. That night, I drive away from Lakewood in silence, the lights along the lake fading behind me like scattered points of light. The next morning, I sit in front of my computer and open the communications contract the inspector sent. I zoom in on the signature date, 3 days after the transfer of $48,200. I open the foundation statement from that year and place the two documents side by side. The money left the fund before the contract was officially signed. I mark it with a digital pen. A small detail. But small details often speak louder than long speeches. I searched the business registration for that communications company. The owner is a familiar name, Mark Reynolds, a man who used to appear at my father's fundraisers. I remember him standing near the wine bar, laughing loudly, calling my father by his first name. I create a simple, clear cash flow analysis, transfer date, amount, category, contract date. I attach the photo I took at 15 of the fund statement. The image is blurry, yellow light reflecting on it, but the number is clear. I send everything to the inspector with a short note, requesting review of sequence and potential conflict of interest. My phone vibrates. Unknown number. A low male voice introduces himself as the inspector assigned to the Lakewood Hope case. He asks a few short questions about how I obtained the photo and why I kept it all these years. I answer exactly that, nothing more. Before ending the call, I say one sentence I haven't spoken aloud in 15 years. I was called delusional over $48,200. There's a brief silence on the other end. Then he says, "We will request a formal explanation from the foundation." That afternoon, I return to Lakewood and park by the lake. A thin sheet of ice covers the water, wind pushing light snow across the surface. 15 years ago, I stood here and thought maybe I had seen it wrong. Maybe I was too sensitive, maybe I was wrong. Today, I stand in the same place, facing the same water, and I don't feel that anymore. 2 days later, a notice of formal questioning is sent to the foundation headquarters. A copy lands in my inbox. The meeting will take place at the Lakewood Hope office with the inspector, legal counsel, and the executive board present. I read the email again. Time, location, list of attendees. This is no longer a story in a white room from years ago. No longer a single line in a file. This time, everything will be said in front of the long boardroom table. The Lakewood Hope conference room is lit early. A long wooden table, an American flag in the corner, the foundation logo behind my father's chair. The inspector sits across, the foundation's attorney beside him. Hannah sits next to me, file open. My mother sits slightly back, hands tightly clasped. At the end of the table is someone I haven't seen in years, Ethan Miller, the foundation's former accountant. My father begins in the familiar voice of an organization president. He places the communications contract on the table, sliding it toward the inspector. All expenses served community outreach purposes, he says. There was no personal intent. Hannah flips to the appendix and points to the payment clause. The transfer was made on March 12th, she says evenly. The contract was signed on March 15th. Please explain why the funds were transferred before the agreement took effect. My father pauses briefly, then says it was a verbal agreement. The inspector writes without looking up. I look around the room. At this same table when I was 15, I once stood at the door listening to my father rehearse a speech about financial transparency. Today, I sit here as the one providing evidence. That record back then wasn't to treat me, I say, my voice steady. It was to cover for you. The sentence landed in the middle of the conference table, sharp and direct. My mother turned to look at me. My father gripped his pen tight. The inspector turned to Ethan. You were responsible for the books that year? Ethan nodded. I was told to adjust the expense category to match the contract after the money had already been transferred. He looked down at the table. I objected. Then I quit. The air got heavier. The ceiling vent hummed softly. When the truth is on the table, the word family stops being a shield. The inspector closed the file. We will expand the investigation into the payment sequence and any conflict of interest connected to Dr. Leonard Price, he said. In the meantime, Dr. Price will be temporarily suspended. My mother exhaled hard. My father stared straight ahead and said nothing. The meeting ended without a single handshake. I walked out with Hannah. In the hallway, a few staff members watched us, their eyes mixed with curiosity and caution. That afternoon, the local news posted a short piece. Lakewood Hope Foundation under review for financial procedures and medical evaluation. My father's name appeared under the headline. My name wasn't mentioned. I looked at the screen, then turned it off. For the first time, the story was no longer trapped inside my old file. My father called me that night, his voice lower than usual. He didn't use the familiar tone of a foundation president. No emphasis, no controlling the pace. Ava, can we meet privately? We sat in his old office, the place where I had once stood outside the door watching a glowing screen 15 years ago. The desk lamp still cast yellow light onto the wood. On the wall, the photo of him shaking the governor's hand at a fundraiser was still there. I could lose everything, he said. The foundation, my reputation, the people who trusted us. He didn't say lose you, he said lose everything. Many people say that even if parents are wrong, as a child you should just close your eyes and sign one signature to save the family's face. But others say the truth needs to be put back where it belongs, even if the prices collapse. In that moment, do you think I should choose filial duty or choose the truth? Leave your opinion. I really want to hear the perspective of people my age. I looked at the tabletop where small scratches ran along the wood edge. What do you want me to do? You can release a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding, that the diagnosis back then was appropriate in that context. He slid a paper toward me. Just sign. I picked it up and skimmed it. One short sentence. I acknowledge that my conclusions at 15 lacked basis and were not meant to accuse anyone. My mother stood in the doorway, holding her coat tight against her chest. I signed the statement back then, she said quietly. I didn't read it carefully. Her words weren't loud, but they made the room feel smaller. I set the paper down. I pushed the pen back toward my father. I'm not signing to make the truth smaller. No one said anything else. The wall clock ticked evenly. Outside the window, the lake was pitch black. The next morning, I filed an official complaint with the medical board about the diagnostic procedure from that year, attaching all the documents the inspector was reviewing. I didn't write much. I simply listed the procedural violations and minor patient rights issues. That afternoon, I stood alone by the lake. The cold wind cut through my thin coat. 15 years ago, I stood here trying to believe adults were always right. Today, I stood in the same place, refusing to shrink myself to fit someone else's piece. 2 days later, the medical board released a preliminary notice. My diagnostic record showed signs of procedural violations and disciplinary review was being considered for the physician involved. A text from my mother popped up on my phone. One line, "We need to talk." The official notice was issued on Monday morning. The medical board confirmed that the diagnostic process back then violated required standards for minor patients. The record was found to lack standardized testing and lacked rights acknowledgement. Dr. Leonard Price was temporarily suspended while disciplinary action was reviewed. That same day, the inspector released a preliminary conclusion about the Lakewood Hope Fund. The $48,200 expense did not follow the contract signing sequence. Part of the funds had to be returned to the reserve. The number was stated plainly in the report, no elegant language, just black text on white paper. That afternoon, my father stood outside the foundation headquarters, a local news microphone pointed at him. He read a prepared statement admitting to procedural errors and promising restructuring. When he reached the part mentioning a family member who raised the issue, he paused for a beat. My name wasn't spoken, but everyone knew. In that moment, I stood in my small office in Minneapolis, watching the broadcast on my laptop. He lifted his head, his eyes no longer rigid. I saw something there that felt both familiar and distant. I didn't appear in front of the press. I didn't do interviews. I only sent a short email to the foundation board and the medical board confirming that my goal was transparency and procedure correction, not to bring anyone down. Just a few lines. The next week, some donors pulled out. 2 of my own clients also paused their contracts because they didn't want to be tied to the noise. My office was quieter than usual, no more nonstop ringing. Justice didn't come with fireworks. It came with bills and empty space. Late at night, as I was cleaning off my desk, an envelope was slipped through the mail slot. The handwriting on it was familiar. I picked it up, feeling the thick paper under my fingertips. The letter wasn't long, no excuses, no blame, just a few lines admitting he had put reputation ahead of his daughter. At the end, my father signed his name in that familiar slight slant. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Outside the window, the city sat under pale yellow lights. The story wasn't over, but it was no longer a secret. A week later, I drove down the road leading to the old treatment center in the suburbs of Duluth. The sign at the entrance had been replaced with a new name, brighter paint, a different logo. The parking lot looked emptier than I remembered. The glass doors reflected the gray sky. I didn't stay long, just long enough to look at the board where the patient visitation schedule used to hang. No trace left of the nights I counted footsteps in the hallway. That place once held a part of my 15-year-old self. Now it was just a building with a different name. That night, I opened my father's letter again. His handwriting wasn't shaky. He admitted he had put the foundation's stability above his daughter's fear. No excuses, no mention of pressure or circumstances, just one short sentence. I was wrong. I finished reading, folded it, and placed it back in my desk drawer beside the files waiting to be handled. My phone lay on the desk. I opened my photo folder and scrolled down to the picture of the fund statement from back then. Yellow light reflecting on the glass, the $48,200 still clear, the red line still out of alignment. I stared at it for a few seconds. My finger hovered over the delete icon. I hit delete. The proof was no longer in my phone, it was in the inspector's hands. The next day, I signed my first contract for a new consulting program, helping small organizations build transparent procedures and protect internal rights. No big sign, no long boardroom, just a rented room on the 3rd floor of an old building in Minneapolis, with a wooden desk and a window looking down at the street. Lakewood Hope kept operating, but smaller. I didn't go back to work there. When they sent an invitation for me to join the new board, I replied with a short email, thanked them, and declined. I haven't called what happened between us forgiveness. Forgiveness takes more than a letter. I call it a boundary. Late afternoon, I returned to Lakewood. Wind off the water swept across the rocks, making the lake surface ripple lightly. I stood in the familiar spot, the place that once made me doubt my own eyes. Cold wind, flat water. After the confrontations, after the notices and local news pieces, I lost a few relationships I thought would last. Some clients left because they didn't want to be connected to the noise. Family dinners grew fewer. There were texts that were never answered. Justice didn't restore everything to the way it was. It only put everything back where it belonged. I lived 15 years with a label on my file, financial delusion. That label didn't fall off with time. It stuck, seeped into how others saw me, and worse, seeped into how I saw myself. Without action, it would have stayed there forever. I learned that at the cost of my youth. I also learned that fear can make adults choose wrong. When reputation is threatened, people protect what they can touch and abandon what is more fragile, the voice of a child. I don't excuse that. But I understand fear has a very real shape, and understanding is not the same as accepting. Justice came, but it left a quiet emptiness behind. My father and I have spoken again. We didn't return to what we were. No more light stories on the porch. No more unconditional trust. But there are slow, careful conversations. There is a kind of acknowledgement that isn't loud. Sometimes that's the closest thing to healing we can reach. That crooked line once made me doubt myself. One red number out of alignment got me isolated from my own voice. Today, I'm not out of alignment anymore. Not because everyone agrees I was right, but because I don't need anyone's permission to know what I saw. This story is fictional, inspired by real-life situations and human experiences to offer reflection and emotional value. The content was supported by AI and edited by a human to tell a journey of reclaiming a voice. It does not encourage copying any actions in the video. For me, what remains isn't winning or losing, but how you stand in front of the truth when no one is standing next to you anymore. If I could leave you one small gift, it would be this. Keep your own evidence, not to get revenge, but to not lose yourself when everything around you starts to tilt. If you're listening from Minnesota, Florida, Texas, or anywhere in the United States, tell me where you are. Your comment gives this story a heartbeat. If what I shared touched a memory of yours, hit like and subscribe so we can meet again in other journeys, where everyone has the right to tell their story, even if that voice was once doubted. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Thank you for staying until the end. Your presence here, quiet and patient, has meant something.